Truth is at the heart of the debate we're proposing today, and the efforts to get crucial answers for bereaved families who are looking to the COVID inquiries for informed responses, having considered all of the information. And all of us in this place have a collective responsibility to stand up for the integrity of our Parliament. If the value of what is said in this chamber is put into question, or worse, it is found to be untrue, then that diminishes our exchanges and makes our national debate poorer. What is said here does and must matter. While we will and should always debate their content, the validity of our speeches and statements should be beyond question. We owe it to our constituents, who expect their representatives to conduct themselves with honesty. If the public cannot trust parliamentarians, then that reflects badly not only on one individual party, but on us all. That's why the question before us today should be above the usual partisan considerations. This is not a battle of ideas. It's not a debate about how we best govern our country. It's a simple consideration of the facts and the evidence, of what was said, and whether there was a deliberate attempt to mislead. The Ministerial Code, signed off by Humza Yousaf, is clear. It states, and I quote, "It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to the Parliament." And on penalties, it says ministers who knowingly mislead the Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. So what should happen next if the Ministerial Code has been breached is not in question. It's already there in print. And the motion that the Scottish Conservatives have put down today doesn't even make a final judgment on whether this chamber was misled by the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, though I will certainly put forward the case later in my speech. All it calls for is an independent investigation into whether there has been a rule breach and why. There shouldn't be a single member in this chamber today who cannot support that motion. And I can confirm we'll accept the Labour amendment today. But of course we will have to reject the amendment proposed by the SNP. I think people watching will find it incredible that the party of government will not even allow an independent assessment of what the First Minister and Deputy First Minister told this Parliament. If the government believes that there has been no breach of the code, then why would they not allow an investigation to go ahead to confirm their side of events? But I suspect it's because they already know what the findings would be, and that would not be favourable for Humza Yousaf or for Shona Robison. But if the government is unwilling to allow that investigation, then let me today set out the facts and allow members and the public to draw their own conclusions. I will give way.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Douglas Ross giving way. And would he agree with me that one of the Nolan principles that requires accountability suggests that public office holders should, of course, submit themselves to the scrutiny necessary to ensure this?
Douglas Ross.
I absolutely agree with the member who chairs the Standards Committee in this Parliament. And let's not forget, previous SNP government ministers, previous SNP First Ministers have referred themselves to the independent adviser. And I have to question why the current First Minister and Deputy First Minister are unwilling to do so. But it was in November of last year that the UK COVID inquiry wrote to the SNP government asking for, and this is a quote, "the extent to which there was informal or private communication about significant decision-making, including, for example, whether there were WhatsApp groups or other form of group chats which key decision-makers used." Then in February of this year, they asked for, and another quote, "any communications relating to key decisions, including internal and external emails, text messages or WhatsApp messages on Scottish Government and private or personal devices." Now, I will give way to any SNP member who can argue that that doesn't constitute a request for the messages. I will give way to any of them. None. No SNP member, presiding officer, is able to stand up in this Parliament and defend their government's argument that they had not been asked for the messages. And it's because that was not a request for a summary or a minute of the decisions made, but for the actual messages. And I think the silence from the SNP members suggests they know it. And let's be clear, that request wasn't made only once in February, but again in March, in July, in August, in September and in October. So again, we're in a debate. I will give way to any SNP representative, having heard of all of these requests, who can claim that was not a requirement for the government to hand over messages. Not just SNP backbenchers, but I will give way to the Deputy First Minister if she would like to defend her case that that was not a request for messages. Nothing. Not a single member willing to do so. Because we know that on each of those occasions, bar the last one, the messages were withheld. Jamie Dawson KC, the counsel to the inquiry, said this 3 weeks ago. The Scottish Government has provided the inquiry with no WhatsApp or other informal messaging material, either in its own possession or the possession of individuals. So we have a situation where 9 months ago the Scottish Government was asked for WhatsApp messages to be provided to the inquiry, but they were only handed over last week. Yet on the 31st of October, the Deputy First Minister said this. In June this year, the inquiry came back to ask for groups of WhatsApp messages, the titles of those groups and who the members of those groups were. And then in September, the inquiry asked for the individual messages, refusing to mention the fact that the inquiry had made similar requests in February, March, July and August. However, Shona Robison went further. In response to my questions in this chamber on the 31st of October, she said, "It is not correct to say that it has been over a year since that request was made. It has been just over a month." That is not the truth. The evidence supplied by the Deputy First Minister herself in the Scottish Government-initiated question on the 8th of November contradicts this. And let us not forget that this evidence was only supplied by the SNP Government because they were forced to do so by the UK COVID inquiry. The Scottish Government were all too happy to be spinning a different tale on timings until the inquiry called them out. The First Minister was even more definitive in his framing of the requests. On the 2nd of November, he said this: "It is crucial to say that when the UK Government inquiry asked us in June for details of the various WhatsApp groups concerning COVID-19, it did not request the messages themselves. The messages were asked for in September, just a matter of weeks ago." Again, that is not true. It is a false statement from the First Minister to this Parliament. Details of the WhatsApp groups were asked for a year ago, not 5 months ago, as Humza Yousaf has claimed. And it was 9 months, not a matter of weeks, that the SNP Government left request after request for these messages outstanding. When I raised this with the First Minister last week, he said he had interpreted the requests too narrowly. Too narrowly. They didn't consider the requests at all. They ignored them time after time after time. 2 weeks ago, not a single WhatsApp message had been transferred from the Scottish Government to the COVID inquiry. The Scottish Parliament has been told contradictory stories about key messages the SNP Government should have provided to the UK COVID inquiry and when that crucial information was requested. Humza Yousaf and Shona Robison should be ashamed of their blatant attempt to deceive grieving families who lost loved ones during the COVID pandemic. They chose spin and secrecy over transparency and truth. How can we draw any other conclusion that they have not been honest, they have misled Parliament, they have broken the Ministerial Code? I'll give way.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. And would he agree with me that it's actually that context? Because what's at stake here is the context of key decisions that were made in government at a time of crisis. And critically, failure to understand that context will mean we can't learn the lessons we so badly need to learn for future crises.
I absolutely agree with Daniel Johnson, and I will repeatedly say this. It is not up to the Scottish Government, to SNP ministers, to say what is relevant or not for the COVID inquiry. We need to get full answers, full transparency, so they have to hand over absolutely everything. Now, let's be clear. The most senior SNP members were still dodging scrutiny by refusing to launch an independent investigation as per their amendment today. But on the 26th of October, the First Minister promised me in this chamber that the Government would fully investigate why those messages had not been transferred and that the Solicitor General had been tasked to lead that investigation. Yet that's the last this Parliament has heard of it. So in the interests of transparency and openness, will the Deputy First Minister update us today on the status of that investigation and on the one launched by the Permanent Secretary? If not, then I expect many will assume it's because it would again reinforce that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have not told the truth, that the requests for meetings dates from February rather than September, as they claim, and as a result, both Humza Yousaf and Shona Robison have deliberately misled this Parliament.
Mr Ross, I think you're well aware of standing orders in relation to accusations that members have deliberately misled this Parliament. Just a warning that we should be steering clear of that, and that's not just in relation to yourself, but the Chamber as a whole through the context of this debate. Mr Ross.
I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I will be careful, but I believe it's deliberate because these statements were not a simple slip of the tongue. They were a product of a concerted effort to confuse and muddle the timeline to make it seem as though the SNP government were not dragging their heels in getting evidence to the inquiry. Presiding Officer, as I have shown, the facts are clear. There can be no doubt that the Ministerial Code was broken, that the information given by Humza Yousaf and Shona Robison on the timing and the scope of requests from the UK COVID inquiry was false. Yet there is a due process that can be followed, and therefore I urge Parliament to vote for our motion today to launch an independent investigation. If the Government do not believe that there has been a breach of the Code, why would they not want that to be investigated? The UK COVID inquiry exists to give bereaved families the answers they deserve on the motivations for the decisions taken during the pandemic. They should be given all of the information they need to find those answers. They should not have to call out the two most senior SNP members to do so. And if members in this Parliament do not stand up for honesty in this chamber, then this Government will always feel able to keep us and our constituents in the dark. It is past time that members of all parties stood up for the truth in the Parliament in which they serve. Thank you.